The moment the bomb clicked, I thought my heart had stopped first. The rain, the sirens, my son screaming my name, it all blurred into one deafening silence. And as I cut that wire with shaking hands, I realized something I hadn't in 60 years of living. Sometimes redemption doesn't come in church pews or apologies. It comes crawling under a car, with death blinking in your face. My name is Benjamin Carter, and this is the story of the day I died and lived again on the same breath. If you're watching this, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. Because somewhere out there, another father, another son, might still have time to make things right. And maybe you'll help me find out how far this revenge has really gone. The napkin hit my tray table like a gunshot. No smile, no small talk, just a trembling hand sliding it across the polished plastic. A woman's perfume brushed my sleeve as she leaned closer, her whisper colder than the recycled air around us. "Sir, fake a heart attack. Get off this plane. Now." That was the moment my pulse stopped pretending to be calm. I looked up. The flight attendant, her name tag read Elena, was standing so close I could see the thin vein pulsing in her neck. Her face wasn't stern the way flight attendants get when you won't buckle up. It was terrified. The kind of terror you can't rehearse. And I did what any stubborn, tired old man would do. I laughed. Quietly, bitterly. I thought it was a prank, a mixed-up. Some TikTok nonsense. Maybe the poor woman had the wrong seat, the wrong passenger. God knows 60-year-old men with thinning hair and half-wrecked hearts aren't exactly prime targets for drama. But she didn't blink. Her hand gripped the seat in front of me, whitening at the knuckles. "I'm begging you," she whispered again, so low I almost thought I imagined it. Then she walked away. I unfolded the napkin. Black ink, rushed handwriting. My fingers felt numb as I read it again. "Fake a heart attack. Get off this plane. Now." My name's Benjamin Carter, and I should tell you this straight. I wasn't afraid of dying that morning. I'd already done that once. When my wife Helen died 6 years ago, a blood clot took her mid-sentence. We were arguing, God help me, about our son not calling enough. I never got to say sorry. Since then, I've been surviving on autopilot. Breathing because the body insists on it. Eating because the fridge is there. Dying quietly in slow motion. So when that napkin appeared, part of me almost smiled. If this was my time, then fine. Maybe I deserved the front row seat. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as passengers shuffled in. A kid behind me kicked the back of my seat, his mother too busy scrolling to notice. Across the aisle, a young man in a business suit was tapping his phone screen like it owed him money. The ordinary rhythm of travel. And yet, there was something off. Elena wasn't greeting passengers anymore. She was watching them. Her eyes darted from face to face, never resting too long. Every so often, she'd stop at one row, stiffen slightly, then move on. It wasn't until she looked at me again that I felt it, that low electric hum of something about to go wrong. I tried to shrug it off. I told myself maybe she was just new to the job. Maybe she'd had a bad day. But deep down, my old instincts kicked in. I'd spent 30 years in aviation safety. You learn to smell tension before you see the fire. Still, I wasn't ready to make a scene. Not me, not Benjamin Carter, who once built his whole life on rules and logic. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 262 to Seattle. Estimated flight time." His voice blurred as I looked down at the napkin again. The words were starting to smudge under my thumb, and for a second, I wondered if they were smudging because of the ink, or because my hand was shaking. Maybe it was the heart medication. Maybe it was fear. Hell, maybe I just didn't care enough to tell the difference. 15 years. That's how long it had been since I'd last spoken to my brother Robert. Now I was flying across the country to attend his funeral. He died suddenly stroke, they said. I didn't cry when I got the call. I just sat in my recliner, staring at the muted TV, feeling the weight of everything we never fixed between us. He and I had built our careers in the same company, once a major aircraft manufacturer. He rose fast, I didn't. When I exposed a safety flaw the company was covering up, he called me a traitor. We never spoke again. And now here I was, sitting on a plane, built by the same company, reading a note that told me to fake a heart attack. Funny, isn't it? Life's sense of irony. Elena passed again, her steps measured, professional. But her eyes, they weren't scanning for open tray tables anymore. They were counting faces. Every time she looked toward row 14, my row, her throat tightened just a little. She bent over to adjust a luggage latch near the opposite aisle, her hand trembling slightly. I saw her mouth move, barely audible. Please. That was when I knew this wasn't a mistake. The engines roared to life, that familiar vibration, rumbling through the floorboards. The cabin tilted forward slightly as the plane began taxiing. The kid behind me started crying. His mother hushed him with a sigh. The man in the suit cursed quietly when he lost cell service. Everything felt so normal that it made the wrongness louder. I folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into my shirt pocket. Maybe this was how old age worked. You stop panicking at danger because life's already worn you down to the bone. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered under my breath, I've survived worse. But the truth, I wasn't sure I believed it. The sound of Elena's shoes on the carpet returned. Slow, deliberate. She stopped beside me again. Her perfume, lavender, and something burnt filled the air. She bent down, pretending to check my seatbelt, and her voice was a breath against my ear. If you don't get off this plane, she said, you won't make it to Seattle. I turned my head, meeting her eyes. There was no room for doubt in them now, just naked fear. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to tell her I wasn't scared, but she was already walking away, her posture stiff, her shoulders squared like someone walking toward a firing line. The engines grew louder. The captain's voice crackled again. Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff. Outside the window, the runway lights blurred into gold streaks under the drizzle. And then something else caught my attention. The reflection of a man 2 rows ahead, glancing back at me over his shoulder. He was wearing a navy blue jacket. No phone, no book, no expression. Just eyes sharp, measuring. When our gazes met, he didn't look away. He smiled, small, controlled, like he'd been expecting me. My chest tightened, not from my heart, but from instinct. Every lesson, every protocol, every training manual I'd ever written whispered the same thing: something's wrong. But I didn't move, didn't speak, because I was Benjamin Carter, too proud, too damn tired, and too damn old to run from ghosts or warnings scribbled on napkins. I adjusted my seatbelt, breathed out, and told myself, if this is it, at least it'll be quick. That's when Elena turned from the galley, her voice trembling just enough for me to hear through the engine noise. Sir, she said softly, eyes locked on mine. Please, I'm begging you. The plane lurched forward, engines screaming. And I realized too late that the most dangerous thing I'd done wasn't boarding this flight. It was refusing to believe her. Elena didn't move like a flight attendant anymore. She moved like someone expecting a bullet. Her smile, the one required by company policy, was gone. In its place was a thin, fixed line of tension, as if she were holding her breath behind her teeth. Her eyes swept the cabin with surgical precision, row by row, seat by seat, not missing a single face. I'd seen that look before, not on a plane, but in the mirror. It was the look of someone who'd already lost too much and was about to lose more. The engines steadied as we waited in line for takeoff. The cabin lights dimmed, washing everything in a muted amber glow. Passengers settled in clicking belts, adjusting vents, opening paperbacks. But underneath that domestic calm was something else, a pulse, a vibration too subtle to name, but impossible to ignore. Elena's gaze cut briefly toward the front first class. Two men sat there, both wearing dark suits, clean-shaven short hair, not reading, not speaking. The kind of quiet that screams authority. The kind of men who carry their posture like a badge. Then her eyes drifted further back. She stopped at a young guy in a hoodie sitting near the rear exit. Couldn't be older than 25. His knee bounced non-stop. Every 30 seconds, he checked his watch like a metronome for anxiety. Something was boiling under the surface of this plane. I looked around, letting my old instincts wake up. 30 years working in aviation safety doesn't leave you. You start to notice things no one else does. Like the overhead bin 3 rows ahead, sealed shut with bright orange tape. That was wrong. Tape like that means inspection pending or security hold. It doesn't belong on a live flight. Or the way one of the flight attendants near the galley kept glancing nervously toward the cockpit door, not because of turbulence, but because he was waiting for a signal. I could almost smell the stress in the air, sharp metallic like ozone before a storm. My heart gave a small protest, one of those fluttering reminders that I wasn't the man I used to be. I adjusted my collar and tried to breathe slowly. I'd promised my doctor no drama, no adrenaline, no stress. Well, too damn late for that. Elena came down the aisle again, slower this time. Her hands brushed each headrest lightly, not for balance, but as a count. Her eyes were locked on me long before she reached my row. When she finally stopped beside me, she bent slightly as if to adjust the overhead vent. Her voice was almost lost under the hum of the engine. "Please," she whispered, "just trust me." Those words hit me harder than they should have. Trust. That was a word that had died in my house a long time ago. I wanted to ask her why, to demand an explanation, but something in her face stopped me. It wasn't just fear, it was sorrow. The kind of sorrow I knew too well. Helen had that same look the day she died the night before her surgery, when I told her not to worry, that I'd handle everything. She'd smiled weakly and said, "Ben, not everything needs fixing." And then she was gone. Elena's eyes had that same desperate plea. Stop trying to control what you can't. For the first time in years, I shut my mouth and listened. She lingered just long enough to make it obvious she was breaking protocol. The man across the aisle noticed. He frowned, adjusting his laptop, pretending not to watch. Elena straightened, gave me one last glance, and continued toward the back. I caught sight of her reflection in the window, checking the blue-jacketed man 2 rows ahead. He hadn't moved. Still staring straight ahead, his hands folded neatly on his lap. He looked calm, too calm. Something inside me tightened. There's a difference between calm and waiting. He looked like he was waiting. I turned my eyes toward the aisle, trying to reason it out. Maybe there'd been a security threat earlier. Maybe a passenger was flagged. Maybe this was all just a misunderstanding. But logic didn't hold water anymore. Logic was for clean checklists and perfect data. Not for the kind of fear I saw in Elena's eyes. A low murmur spread through the back of the cabin, something about a luggage mix-up. A woman was arguing softly with another flight attendant. I caught fragments, said it was supposed to be moved, clearance from security, wrong manifest. The word manifest made my skin crawl. That's not a passenger argument. That's a systems one. Elena appeared again, pretending to calm the dispute, but I noticed the quick flick of her hand toward her colleague. 3 fingers raised, thumb tucked. It wasn't random. It was a signal. God help me, I knew that gesture. It was the quiet language of people trained to respond to emergencies without alerting civilians. We used it during crash simulations when panic was the enemy. I felt the napkin crinkle in my pocket, like a heartbeat. Fake a heart attack. Get off this plane. Now. My fingers brushed the fabric, and for a fleeting second, I wondered what it would cost me to obey. Embarrassment. A wasted ticket. Or something worse if I didn't. Elena stopped by my row again, pretending to collect trash. Her hand trembled slightly as she held out the bag. I dropped my empty water cup in our fingers, almost touching. Her whisper slipped between us. There's no time. My mouth went dry. I turned to her, trying to keep my voice low. What's happening? Her lips barely moved. Not here. Just please trust me. Before I could press her, she was already walking away, eyes darting toward the cockpit once more. The man in the blue jacket shifted in his seat, cracked his knuckles, and gave a small knowing smile. A cold wave rolled through my gut. I wanted to believe I was overreacting, that age had made me paranoid. But my instincts were louder than my pride now. I glanced out the window. Rain streaked the glass, and the reflection staring back at me looked older, more fragile than I felt inside. My face was pale, my pupils too wide. I saw in that reflection the same thing I'd seen in Elena's eyes, fear dressed as composure. Then over the intercom, the captain's calm voice broke the silence. Flight attendants, prepare for departure. Elena's hand gripped the galley door. For a brief second, she looked directly at me, and her expression said everything words couldn't. This might be your last chance. I froze. My mind screamed to move, but my body stayed loyal to its old master's stubbornness. 60 years of pretending I was always in control, and now control was the one thing that might kill me. Elena turned away, her back straight, her steps steady, but her shoulders trembled once, just once, before she vanished behind the curtain to first class. I pressed my palm against my chest, felt the uneven rhythm of my heart, and whispered to no one, "What the hell have you gotten yourself into, Ben?" The plane began to roll. The napkin in my pocket felt heavier than any truth I'd carried in my life. I stayed seated, because that's what men like me do. We stay even when the ground under us is shaking. The napkin was still in my pocket, folded neatly like a dare I'd refused to take. I could feel it pressing against my chest with every heartbeat, the ink bleeding faintly through the paper. I whispered to myself, if it's my time, it's my time. I wasn't being brave, just tired. There's a difference. The engines whined, the plane's nose tilting slightly as we began to taxi. The hum beneath my shoes felt familiar, steady, predictable, comforting, in a way only a man who spent decades in the industry could appreciate. For 30 years I'd taught pilots about systems redundancies and probabilities. Airplanes don't scare me. People do. But that morning, for the first time in a long while, I couldn't tell which one was more dangerous. The runway lights blurred past the windows. Passengers leaned back, some already closing their eyes. A baby began to cry. Then thud. A heavy crash from the rear. The sound wasn't metal against metal. It was human panic. I turned my neck stiff and saw a young man bolt upright from his seat, his face pale as snow. His voice cracked through the cabin, "We can't take off. Stop the plane, we can't." A middle-aged man beside him, broad shoulders, shaved head, grabbed his arm, forcing him down. "Sit down, kid," he hissed through his teeth. The young man struggled, trembling. "You don't understand, But before he could finish, Elena was there. She appeared like she'd been waiting for it, her face calm, her tone measured, professional. "Sir, please take your seat. We'll sort it out once we're in the air." The rest of the passengers murmured, annoyed, impatient. The businessman across from me rolled his eyes. Someone muttered, "Jesus, people are losing it these days." But I wasn't irritated. I was alert. Something in Elena's posture gave her away. She wasn't trying to calm him down. She was trying to keep him quiet. The engine's pitch changed, throttle increasing. We were speeding up. My fingers dug into the armrests. every fiber of my experience screamed that something was off. The kind of off that doesn't get fixed with apologies or fight vouchers. Elena leaned over the young man, whispering something only he could hear. His shoulders stiffened, his breathing slowed, and then he nodded like a soldier obeying orders. She gave his arm a reassuring pat and straightened up, the mask of professionalism sliding back into place. But as she turned, her eyes locked onto mine, and in that instant, the mask cracked. It was only a flicker, a second of naked dread, but it was enough. I recognized it, the same look my wife gave me when the monitors started beeping faster in the hospital, and I kept saying, "It's nothing. It'll pass." That silent plea, "Listen before it's too late." My chest tightened. Maybe it was the memory. Maybe it was my heart. The plane's cabin was quiet again, but the air felt heavy, compressed. My brain started cataloging details. The sealed overhead bin 3 rows ahead. The 2 silent men in suits up front, not talking to each other. The kid who just panicked now, staring down at his hands like he'd been silenced. I wanted to press the call button to say something, anything, but years of conditioning held me back. You don't cause chaos on a plane. You don't shout fire in a crowded theater. You wait. You think. You measure. So I waited. Elena made her way down the aisle again. When she reached my row, she paused just long enough to make it seem routine. "Everything all right, sir?" Her tone was light, but her hands betrayed her. They were shaking. I nodded slowly. "Fine. Just tired." She bent closer, pretending to check my seatbelt, her hair brushing my shoulder. Her voice was a ghost of breath. "They switched your seat." I blinked, unsure if I heard her right. "What?" Her lips barely moved. "You were not supposed to sit here." The hum of the engines seemed to fade out for a second, replaced by the pounding in my ears. "What do you mean?" But she was already straightening her expression, snapping back to professionalism. "Just relax, sir. We'll be in the air shortly." She smiled, but it wasn't real. Then she moved on, vanishing behind the curtain. My seat suddenly felt wrong beneath me, like it didn't belong to me at all. "They switched your seat." I replayed that line in my head over and over, each repetition heavier than the last. It wasn't just a warning. It was a fact. A mistake. A setup. Something deliberate. I reached for the seat pocket, needing something to do with my hands. The in-flight magazine slid out. Beneath it was a crumpled boarding pass. Someone else's. Not mine. Different name. Different seat number. Seat 14B, my seat. I froze. The name printed there was familiar, though it took a few seconds to click. Robert Carter. My brother. The world narrowed to a tunnel. The hum of the engines, the chatter, everything went distant. I was sitting in a dead man's seat. My breath came shallow. I gripped the armrests as the plane rolled on into the runway, the lights outside aligning like a countdown. For 15 years I'd hated my brother. For 15 years I'd refused every apology, every olive branch. Now I was sitting where he was supposed to sit. His name, his seat, his fate. And somewhere in this cabin, someone was waiting for the wrong Carter to die. The engines roared, building speed, the vibration rattling my bones. My heart hammered in my chest, not from fear, but from a sudden, brutal clarity. Elena's voice echoed in my mind. "You were not supposed to sit here." I pressed my palm over my heart, whispering, Jesus, Robert. "What did you get us into?" Then from the back of the plane, a muffled cry, "Don't let it take off." Elena's voice cut through the chaos. "Remain seated, please." But it was too late. I knew now. Something terrible was already in motion. The first lie of that morning had sounded harmless. "Mr. Carter, would you mind switching seats?" the young woman at the check-in counter had said, her smile as polished as the countertop. The buckle on your original seat's being repaired. We can move you to 14B, more legroom actually. I'd nodded without thinking. I was early calm, even grateful for the kindness. I'd told her I'd sat in worse places in life. She'd laughed politely, printed a new boarding pass, and wished me a good flight. It took less than 30 seconds. 30 seconds to shift fate. Now sitting in 14B, with the engines humming and the napkin still pressed against my ribs, I realized that seat hadn't been broken. It had been chosen. The hum of the engines deepened, the plane inching closer to takeoff speed. I wanted to stand, to shout, to demand they stop, but fear of being that crazy old man chained me to the cushion. I looked around, scanning for Elena. She wasn't in the aisle. For a heartbeat, I thought she might have abandoned me, that maybe I'd imagined all of this. Then she reappeared from the galley, her face composed again, but her hands betraying the truth, trembling, knuckles white, as she gripped a blood pressure cuff. She approached with a trained smile, the kind that's meant to calm nervous passengers. "Sir, you look a little pale. Mind if I check your blood pressure?" The people nearby barely glanced up. To them it was routine. To me it was theater. I offered my arm, trying to steady my breathing. The cuff tightened around my bicep, squeezing rhythmically. The machine beeped once, then again, faint and irregular. She leaned closer, her lips almost touching my ear. "If you stay seated," she whispered, "you'll die before we land." My throat tightened. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Her eyes flicked toward the cockpit, then back at me. "Not now. Not here." Was it my seat?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Her hand brushed the cuff release, pretending to jot down numbers on a small pad. "It's not your seat," she said softly. "It never was." The words hit like turbulence from inside my chest. Not your seat. For a moment, my vision blurred. Not from fear, but from memory. The last time someone warned me about danger, I hadn't listened. It had been Helen's doctor 5 years ago. He'd told me her blood clot was unstable, that she needed to stay overnight. But Helen was tired of hospitals, and I, or if the fair logic Mr. Reason, had convinced her we could manage at home. "It's just precaution," I'd said, believing control was safety. She died 3 hours later. Now here I was, decades of logic dissolving under a single whispered sentence. I looked up at Elena, my heart hammering against the cuff. "You're sure?" Her voice cracked just slightly. "I'm sure enough to risk my job to tell you." I wanted to ask more, but she pressed a finger to her lips. Then, with a motion so subtle no one else noticed, she reached into her pocket and adjusted the small microphone on her uniform. For a second, I caught the glint of a wire beneath her collar. It wasn't standard issue. She was communicating with someone. The plane jerked as the pilot announced a brief delay, something about unexpected clearance. The engines whined, then softened. A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin, people sighing, checking watches, grumbling. But beneath their frustration, I could feel it, a thread of quiet panic, winding through the air. Elena crouched beside me, still pretending to take my vitals. "Listen carefully," she murmured. "Someone on this plane thinks you're someone else. Your seat was flagged before boarding." I frowned, whispering back, "Flagged for what?" She shook her head. "I can't say. But if we take off, they'll act. You won't have time to react." A bead of sweat rolled down my temple. "Then stop the plane." She exhaled, a tremor breaking through her calm. "We're trying. But the cockpit's under lock. You need to play along, stay calm. Play along." That was never my strength. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flashlight, pretending to check my pupils. Her voice was almost inaudible. "Mr. Carter, do you know anyone who might have booked this ticket for you?" I thought back. The purchase had been through my son Michael. He'd called me the night before. "Dad, I'll handle the flight details. Just get to the funeral." He wanted to make things easier. I hadn't questioned it. I never do when guilt is involved. "I didn't book it myself," I said. "My son did." Her eyes narrowed. "When yesterday morning?" She looked toward the rear again. I followed her gaze and saw the young man from before, the one who had panicked, still staring down at his lap, gripping something under his jacket. His leg bounced uncontrollably. He wasn't nervous. He was worried. Elena touched my wrist, gently snapping my attention back. Her fingers were cold, deliberate, grounding. "Your name," she whispered, "wasn't supposed to be on the manifest." I froze. The blood drained from my face. She leaned in closer, so close I could see the reflection of the cabin lights trembling in her pupils. "They switched names. They changed the ticket. Someone expected a different Carter in 14B. The air left my lungs like I'd been punched. Robert. My brother's ghost was sitting in this seat before I ever boarded. I tried to speak, but the words tangled in my throat. "My brother? He was supposed to be." Elena nodded quickly. "I know. He canceled his trip last minute, didn't he?" "Yes." Her voice was sharp but low. "Then you took his place," which means I finished the thought for her, whispering it like a confession. "Whatever they planned for him, they think it's me." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The captain's voice broke over the intercom again, calm as ever. "Flight attendants, please prepare for final takeoff." Elena rose to her full height, her mask slipping back into place, but her eyes lingered on me for half a heartbeat longer than they should have. The look said everything. "Hold on. Don't panic. Trust me." She walked toward the galley, each step measured, deliberate, as if walking a tightrope over hell. And me, I sat frozen in 14B, the seat that wasn't mine, knowing that if I didn't move soon, it might become my grave. He'd been there the whole time. 2 rows ahead by the window, wearing a navy blue jacket that caught the cabin light like polished steel. I hadn't paid him much attention before, just another quiet passenger in the crowd. But now, after Elena's warning, he wasn't part of the background anymore. He was the detail that didn't belong. Every few seconds, he turned his head, eyes cutting in my direction. Not staring, just checking. Watching like a predator, measuring the distance before it pounces, races. His posture was unnervingly still. No phone, no drink. Just that faint, satisfied half smile that said he already knew how this was going to end. I'd seen that look before too. The look of a man who'd done something irreversible and was just waiting for the world to catch up. The engines roared louder as we turned toward the runway. My pulse synced with the vibration of the fuselage. Every instinct I had screamed to get up, to run, to tear my seatbelt apart and demand answers. But I stayed. Because after 60 years of being right, I still didn't know how to run when it mattered. Elena moved fast. She appeared near the galley, whispering to her colleague, a younger male attendant, with buzzed hair and haunted eyes. I couldn't hear them, but I could see the panic in his movements. He grabbed the intercom, pressed a button, and spoke rapidly into it. Seconds later, the engines eased down. The hum softened, the acceleration slowing. The plane wasn't stopping, but it wasn't speeding up either. They were stalling. Passengers murmured, confused. Someone unbuckled their seatbelt to stretch. A woman laughed nervously, saying, "Guess we're not taking off yet." Elena glanced toward me. From across the aisle, her eyes saying what her voice couldn't. "Stay still." Then movement. The man in the blue jacket shifted, stretching his neck. He glanced out the window, then down at his wristwatch. His fingers drummed lightly against the armrest. 5 taps, a pause, then 3 more. A pattern. A signal. I leaned slightly to my left, pretending to adjust my shoe just enough to see his hands. His right hand slipped inside his jacket, slow, deliberate. Not nervous. Practiced. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't the jittery fidgeting of an anxious traveler. This was someone preparing. The coffee cup in my hand trembled slightly. It was still half full, lukewarm, forgotten. My grip tightened around it. 30 years of safety training replayed in my mind. Lessons about threat identification, cabin behavior, analysis-controlled escalation. None of that mattered now. What mattered was instinct. He stood up, smooth and unhurried like a man reaching for the overhead bin. But his eyes weren't on his luggage. They were on me. That cold smile returned small, knowing, surgical. For one suspended second, the world went silent. The air between us thickened, and I could almost hear my heartbeat bouncing off the aluminum walls. Then, without thinking, my body moved before my mind did. I flung the coffee straight at his face. The brown liquid splattered across his cheek and jacket steam curling up between us. He flinched, not from pain but surprise, his hand jerking from inside his coat, revealing something metallic, a small black device clutched tight. He didn't shout, didn't curse. He just looked at me, stunned, almost offended, and then his thumb pressed down on something. A click. Not the click of a trigger. No gunshot. A dull mechanical snap. And every muscle in my body turned to stone. The passengers gasped. A woman screamed. Elena lunged forward, shouting, "Everyone stay seated." Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The young attendant grabbed the intercom again, his words spilling out fast. "Captain, medical emergency, emergency." The plane jolted slightly as the brakes engaged. The engines dropped to an idle hum, the speed decreasing. Through the small window, I saw the runway lights flash past, slower now, like dying fireflies. Elena reached the man in 2 strides, her expression pure command. "Usher, please step back," she barked. But he wasn't listening. His jaw clenched. The device, small square wrapped in duct tape, was still in his grip, red light flickering beneath his thumb. "Everyone calm down," another attendant shouted, but it was pointless. The cabin erupted. People yelled, clutched their children, scrambled for their phones. Seatbelts clicked open in panic. The man's voice was barely a whisper, but I heard it, every syllable clear as a confession. "You weren't supposed to be here." The words sliced through me. My mouth went dry. He took a step forward. Elena positioned herself between us, one arm outstretched. "Sir, please put that down." He didn't. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if studying me, as if wondering whether to finish the job or wait for the command that hadn't yet come. And then, with a motion too small to notice, his thumb shifted again. Click. A sound that wasn't gunfire. A sound that lived somewhere deeper, older. It was the sound of something activating. The entire plane seemed to inhale. Elena's face drained of color. The young attendant's voice cracked through the intercom again. "Captain, abort takeoff. We need ground units now." The man's eyes flicked toward the ceiling, almost peaceful, as though he'd already accepted what came next. Passengers cried. Someone prayed. I gripped the armrest until my knuckles ached. That single click echoed in my skull like a heartbeat. Mechanical. Final. Whatever he'd triggered, it had already begun. "Everyone stay seated." Elena's voice cut through the cabin, sharp and commanding, snapping the crowd back from chaos. "Do not move. Do not touch anything above your seats." Her tone wasn't polite anymore. It was military. Controlled fear, measured authority. The kind of voice that makes people obey before they even understand why. The young attendant moved fast. He climbed onto the aisle armrest, reached above my row 14B, and pulled the latch on the overhead bin. For half a second, nothing happened. Then he froze. Inside, wedged between 2 carry-ons, was a small metal box, 6 inches wide, sealed with duct tape and wires coiled tight like veins. A faint red light blinked on the side, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The entire cabin went dead silent. Even the babies stopped crying. I could hear the hum of the engines, the click of a seatbelt unclasping somewhere behind me, and the soft hiss of my own breath trembling in my throat. The young attendant whispered, "Oh, God." Elena stepped forward, voice steady but urgent. "Back away. Don't touch it." He did, slowly. His hands shook as he climbed down, eyes glassy with the realization of what he'd just uncovered. My mind tried to rationalize, to label it something else, a forgotten piece of equipment, a prank, a tool. But the truth was sitting right in front of me, blinking red. A device. My pulse thundered in my ears. I could feel each heartbeat like an explosion under my ribs. My mouth was dry, my hands cold. The man in the blue jacket didn't move. He just sat there, face wet. From the coffee, calm again. That same eerie calm, the kind that comes from a man who's done this before. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You shouldn't have been here, old man," he said softly, almost regretfully. The words hit harder than any threat could. Elena turned sharply to her colleague, whispering into her mic, "Code 3. Redirect immediately." Then she pressed the intercom, her voice switching back to that firm professional cadence. "Captain, this is Flight 172. We need an immediate return to gate. Medical emergency escalating. Repeat, immediate return." There was a pause, just long enough for the meaning to sink in, before the pilot's voice replied, "Confirmed. Returning to gate." The engines shifted pitch, the cabin tilting slightly as the plane began to slow. Passengers exhaled in confusion, relief, and fear all at once. No one yet knew the truth, but they could feel it. You always can when death is sitting a few feet above your head. Elena crouched down beside Sai, her breathing, shallow eyes darting between the device and the blue-jacketed man. Her whisper trembled just enough to betray her calm facade. "Listen carefully, Mr. Carter. You need to stay completely still." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. She leaned closer, eyes locked on the blinking light. "That box isn't random. They didn't put it above you by accident." The truth clicked into place in my mind with terrifying precision. The seat changed the wrong name on the manifest, my brother's canceled flight. It all formed a pattern, one I'd been too blind to see. "My seat," I muttered. 14B, it wasn't broken." She looked at me, her jaw tight. "No, it was reserved." I felt the world tilt again, not from the plane's turn, but from realization. 20 years ago, I'd worked for the FAA as an aviation safety inspector. I'd exposed a manufacturing flaw in a commercial aircraft line, one that could have grounded half the industry. My report went public. The company buried it. My brother, God rest him, had helped them cover it up. I was the whistleblower. He was the loyalist. It destroyed our fun family. But a few months before his death, I'd received an anonymous voicemail. Just breathing, then a man's voice saying, "You were right back then, but they're still flying." And then silence. That voice. I recognized it now. It belonged to an old colleague, Daniel Hayes, a quiet, brilliant FAA investigator who'd disappeared 6 weeks ago. Elena's voice pulled me back. "That seat, Mr. Carter, 14B, was booked under Daniel Hayes." I stared at her, my breath catching. "You're saying," she nodded grimly, "they wanted him dead, not you." The red light blinked again, steady as a pulse. The man in the blue jacket watched it too, almost lovingly, like a craftsman admiring his work. A faint smile ghosted across his lips. "Doesn't matter now," he murmured. "We adapt." My stomach dropped. He wasn't panicking. He was waiting. Elena straightened, whispering fast into her mic again. "Code black potential. Lock cockpit. Keep descent low." Her eyes flicked to me one last time, her voice just above a breath. "But now," she said, her words heavy, final, "they know your face." The blinking red light reflected in her eyes, like twin flames. And in that instant, I knew I hadn't just sat in the wrong seat. I'd stepped straight into someone else's death sentence. Hours later, I sat in a cold, windowless room that smelled like burnt coffee and fear. The kind of room where people either confess or break. The chaos of the tarmac was gone now. No sirens, no shouting passengers, no blinking red light to remind me that I'd nearly died in someone else's seat. Just silence and fluorescent hum. My hands still trembled, the faint tremor of adrenaline refusing to leave. Across from me sat a man in a dark suit. His tie was crooked, his patience already thin. The kind of federal face that says he's heard every story before. But he hadn't heard mine. Not this one. Beside him stood Elena, no uniform now, no mask of politeness. The calm, measured woman from the airplane was gone. What replaced her was something colder, sharper. A badge glinted from the inside of her jacket, Department of Homeland Security. I stared at it, then at her. So you're not a flight attendant. She met my eyes without flinching. Not in this lifetime. The agent across from me cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, we're aware you've had a complicated history with your former employer. Carter, Aerospace Group, correct? I nodded slowly. That was 20 years ago. Apparently not for everyone. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, grainy stills from airport security cameras, lists of names, and one image that punched the air from my lungs. Robert Carter, my brother, shaking hands with a man I hadn't seen in decades. Daniel Hayes. Your brother, the agent said quietly, was working with an internal whistleblower from the FAA Hayes. They were building a case against Carter Aerospace for falsifying crash data on several aircraft models. Hayes went missing 6 weeks ago. We believe he's the original target of today's incident. I rubbed my temples, trying to process these. Robert was helping him, Elena answered before the agent could. He was trying to make things right. He reached out to Hayes before he died. But someone inside the company found out. They moved to eliminate Hayes and anyone who could connect him back to the cover-up. Her voice softened. Your brother's death wasn't natural, Ben. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. You're saying he was killed? Elena didn't answer, which told me everything. The agent continued flipping through documents. Our intel suggests the bomb on your white was planted by a corporate security cell operating off the books. Former engineers, field contractors. Men who knew how to make it look like an accident. Air accident, I said bitterly. Always cleaner that way. The agent nodded. Exactly. I sank back in my chair. The pieces clicked together like rusted gears. Robert's guilt, his silence, his sudden stroke. And now me, accidentally sitting where Daniel Hayes should have been. What I don't understand, I said, my voice low, is why I was even on their radar. Elena met my eyes, her tone matter of fact. Because you were the first one to speak up 20 years ago. You cost them millions, Ben. You embarrassed powerful people. They never forgot your name. When Hayes reached out to your brother, they assumed he was recruiting you again. And when Robert died, they thought I took his place. I finished. She nodded once. And you did. Whether you meant to or not. Silence hung between us, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. The agent finally closed his folder and stood. You'll be under federal protection until we dismantle the rest of the network. You're not under investigation, Mr. Carter, but you are valuable. Valuable, I echoed. That's what they called my brother when he was covering up bodies. The agent gave a tight nod and left the room, leaving me alone with Elena. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The hum of the lights filled the space between breaths. I looked at her, this stranger who'd saved my life, and asked quietly, How long have you been undercover? She hesitated, then said, Too long. We've been tracking this group since Hayes first disappeared. The flight was a trap. They wanted him exposed mid-air, make it look like a freak malfunction. And me, her lips twitched into something between regret and admiration. You were the wild card. The one variable no one could predict. I let out a tired laugh that hurt on the way up. That's what my wife used to call me. Elena's expression softened. You did good, Ben. You stayed calm. You gave us the time we needed to act. I looked down at my trembling hands. I didn't stay calm. I just didn't know what else to do. She gave a faint smile. Sometimes that's all survival is. A knock interrupted us. The agent returned, phone in hand. His face had changed, tension carved deep around his eyes. He walked straight to Elena and handed her the device. You should see this. She glanced at the screen and her body stiffened. Then she passed it to me. A text message glowed in stark white letters on a black background. Unknown number, you still owe us. A brother. My blood went cold. I looked up at Elena. She was already signaling to someone outside the room. The door burst open and 2 agents rushed in. She turned to me, her voice calm but urgent. We need to move you. Now. The words blurred in my ears. My mind replayed that text again and again. You still owe us a brother. Not past tense, not vengeance completed. A promise. I followed her out of the room, the corridor lined with men in suits, radios buzzing. For the first time since that napkin slid onto my tray table, I realized something that made my stomach twist. The plane had been just the beginning. They moved me to a hotel that wasn't really a hotel. The lobby was empty. The windows sealed, the carpets too clean. The kind of place that doesn't advertise, that doesn't appear on booking sites, and where nobody asks for ID, because you're already on a list. 2 agents escorted me to the 11th floor. Room 1104. Generic art on the wall. Blackout curtains, no view. Just a bed, a desk, and the slow hum of recycled air. I hadn't slept in 20 hours, but I wasn't tired. My nerves were still wired to the sound of that click on the plane, the one that still echoed in the back of my mind every time silence got too long. Elena came in, about an hour later. No uniform, no badge showing this time. She carried 2 cups of coffee and a weariness that even caffeine couldn't fix. Mind if I sit? She asked. Wouldn't stop you if I tried. She smiled faintly and sat across from me. The air between us felt strange, half gratitude, half grief. I watched her hands. They were steady now, no tremor. Professionals know how to file fear away. I used to be one of them. She took a slow sip of her coffee. You okay? I let out a humorless chuckle. Define okay. Alive. That word landed heavier than I expected. I nodded. Yeah. Still figuring out why. She tilted her head slightly. You mean why you survived? I stared down at the cup in my hands. I mean why Mistisoi, the seat, the timing, even the warning. Feels like I wasn't just lucky. Feels like I was selected. Elena didn't deny it. She just said, maybe you were. We sat in silence for a while, the air thick with things that didn't need saying. Finally, she spoke again, quieter this time. I read your old report, Ben. The one that blew open the Carter aerospace case. You stood up when everyone else stayed quiet. That took guts. I laughed softly. It cost me everything. My job, my marriage, my son. Her eyes softened. And your brother? My chest tightened. I never forgave him. I said, voice low. Not once. He signed off on falsified safety data. Planes crashed because of it. People died. He called it business pressure. I called it betrayal. Elena set her cup down. And now I stared at the wall. The clock ticked softly. Now he's dead and I can't tell him that I understand. She didn't say anything right away. When she finally spoke, her voice had that quiet wisdom of someone who'd seen too many people break under guilt. Forgiveness isn't weakness, Ben. Sometimes it's the only way to stop bleeding. I looked at her. You really believe that? She nodded slowly. You think I don't carry ghosts? Every agent does. We all have people we couldn't save. The trick is learning to live without opening the wound every time you breathe. I let her words sink in. They didn't comfort me, not exactly, but they landed somewhere deep like a truth I'd been running from. Maybe she was right. Maybe holding on to anger had been my way of staying connected to the people I'd lost. Maybe the only way to live now was to let go. I spent 20 years thinking I was a whistleblower, I said after a while. But I wasn't. I was just angry. Angry enough to tell the truth, angry enough to burn it all down. But today I swallowed my throat tight. Today I realized being angry didn't save anyone. It just made me alone. Elena leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. Then don't stay silent now. You have the story. The records. You're the only one who can finish what Hayes started. You survived for a reason, Ben. Don't waste that second chance. Her words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Second chance. At 60 years old, that phrase felt foreign, like something reserved for younger men, people who still believed in time. But maybe this was mine. I nodded slowly. I'll help. However I can. Elena smiled, a small, tired smile that looked almost like relief. Good. We'll need your statement tomorrow. And maybe your memory of that old cover-up. The names, the patterns, someone out there still wants them buried. I stood stretching my stiff legs, staring out the dark window. The city glowed below, distant, alive, completely unaware that a bomb almost erased a plane full of souls just hours ago. I pressed my palm against the glass. My reflection stared back, older, lined but not broken. For the first time in years, I didn't see guilt. I saw purpose. I turned to Elena. You know, I used to believe surviving meant you got lucky. Now I think it means you're responsible. She nodded. That's the truth most people never learn. We both fell silent again. For the first time since the flight, the quiet felt peaceful. Then 3 sharp knocks at the door. Elena tensed, hand instinctively reaching for her sidearm. A man in a black suit stepped in, earpiece glinting. His face was grim. Sir, he said, addressing me directly, someone found you. My stomach dropped. What do you mean, found me? He held out a phone, its screen still glowing. They're outside. The words landed like a blade through glass. Elena was already on her feet, her hand on my arm. Don't move, Ben. But I could already feel it. Whatever peace I'd built in that room was shattering. The past wasn't done with me. Not yet. Elena's voice followed me down the hall, sharp and controlled. Ben, wait. Don't go out there yet. But I was already moving. I don't know what came over me. Maybe instinct. Maybe old pie. Maybe just exhaustion from being afraid of ghosts. Whatever it was, my legs didn't stop until I reached the glass doors of the hotel lobby. Outside, the night was slick with rain. Street lights cast trembling halos across the wet pavement. And there, leaning against a black SUV parked under the awning, was a man I hadn't seen in years. Michael, my son. He looked older than 38, should look too thin. Shoulders hunched, his once boyish face carved by sleepless nights. His suit clung to him, dark from the rain. The collar of his shirt was open, no tie. He looked like a man who'd run out of things to hide behind. When he saw me, his eyes softened, relief and guilt wrestling behind them. Dad, he said quietly. You're okay. I stood there, frozen halfway between disbelief and anger. That's debatable. He took a step forward. I tried to call. They wouldn't let me through. I had to come myself. My voice cracked in the still air. Why the hell were you anywhere near this?" He exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck. "Because I was the one who booked your ticket." The rain pattered harder on the pavement. For a moment, all I could do was stare at him, the sound of it filling the silence that stretched like wire between us. What I needed you on that flight," he said, the words tumbling out fast like confession, under a priest's stare. "The DOJ's been reopening the Carter Aerospace case, your old company. I'm part of the investigation now. We've been tracking a leak inside the FAA, someone feeding intel to a private defense contractor. We believed Daniel Hayes was meeting an intermediary on that flight. I thought if you were there, you might recognize him, maybe give us something before he disappeared again." My jaw clenched. "You put me on that plane to spy for you. It wasn't supposed to be dangerous," he snapped, then immediately lowered his voice, guilt breaking through the anger. "Dad, I swear I didn't know what they were planning. We were monitoring communications. The moment Hayes changed his ticket, everything went to hell." My chest tightened. "Used me, Michael." He looked away, rain dripping from his hair. "I know." There was a long pause, one of those silences heavy enough to bend a lifetime. Then he said quieter, "I didn't know how else to reach you." That hit harder than anything else could have. He took a shaky breath. "After Mom died, you just disappeared into yourself. You shut me out. Every time I called, you'd talk about the past, about work, about anything except us. I thought maybe if I brought you back into the fight, you'd find a reason to live again." The words landed like stones. I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy who used to sit on my lap and build paper airplanes, now a man who carried my same stubborn silence like an inherited curse. "You think dragging me into your investigation was the way to fix us?" I said, my voice trembling between rage and heartbreak. "You almost got me killed, Michael." His eyes glistened. "I know. God, I know." He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "I've spent my whole life trying not to become you, and I ended up making the same damn mistakes. I thought I was protecting the truth. I didn't realize I was gambling with the only family I have left." The anger drained out of me, leaving only exhaustion and something heavier, understanding. Because he wasn't wrong. I'd done the same thing decades ago. I'd chosen truth over peace, justice over love. And I'd lost both. I reached out, my hand trembling, and rested it on his shoulder. "You're your mother's son," I said softly. "Still trying to save the world even when it's burning." He let out a weak laugh, a sound halfway between relief and grief. "You taught me that." For the first time in 15 years, we stood close enough to recognize each other again, not just father and son, but two buskin' men who finally saw the same pain reflected back. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For all of it. For leaving. For the distance. For thinking you didn't matter anymore." I swallowed hard, my voice barely more than breath. "You don't have to be sorry. You just have to be here." He nodded, eyes glistening. Then he did something I never thought he would. He reached out and pulled me into an embrace. It wasn't the kind of hug that fixes anything. It was the kind that simply says, "I'm still here." I held him tight, my fingers digging into his coat, and for a fleeting second, I believed maybe this was the second chance neither of us thought we'd get. Maybe this was why I'd survived that flight. Then the SUV's headlights flashed twice. We both turned instinctively. A sharp, rhythmic blink. Then another. Then the dashboard lights flickered. Behind us, a security agent shouted from the hotel entrance, "Sir, stay away from the vehicle." "Michael Frusis, what's going on?" The agent's voice grew louder, urgent. "There's a device. 50-meter radius, move." My blood ran cold. Elena burst through the doors, her gun drawn, shouting, "Get back. Get away from the SUV now." The rain stopped meaning anything. Time slowed, sound stretched thin, and I felt my son's body tense beneath my grip. Second chances, I thought. They never come free. The night cracked open in sirens and flashing red lights. Rain hammered the pavement, blurring the edges of everything, the SUV, the agents, shouting the world itself. Device under the vehicle, Elena screamed. Get down! Michael froze beside me, caught between instinct and disbelief. I could see the terror in his eyes, the same terror I'd once seen in my wife's, when the monitors started beeping in that hospital room. The terror of knowing you're out of time. But I wasn't out of time. Not this time. Without thinking, I shoved Michael hard toward the emergency access hatch that led to the underground service corridor. Go, I shouted. Get down there. He stumbled back, shaking his head. Daddy, no, go. I roared, the voice of a father, not a man. He hesitated, eyes wide, then obeyed, scrambling toward the metal door as two agents pulled it open. Elena was yelling something at me, but I couldn't hear. The world had narrowed to a pulse, that steady, deadly, blinking light beneath the SUV. Every flash felt like a heartbeat counting down the seconds I didn't have. I dropped to my knees, the rain cold against my skin, and crawled under the chassis. The stench of oil and metal filled my lungs. The device was strapped to the fuel line, small, compact, military design. 2 wires, one red, one black. Both fed into a timer now flashing in rapid rhythm. Somewhere in the fog of panic, my old training kicked in. I'd spent half my life inspecting systems built to fail only once. Safety redundancies, fused triggers, circuits that behaved like hearts. I'd always said machines were just people that didn't bleed. And right now, this one was bleeding out. Then Elena's voice was above me, now sharp and terrified. Don't touch it. Backup's coming. I laughed under my breath, the sound half hysterical, half holy. Yeah, well, so's death. The timer blinked faster. I could see the condensation on the wires trembling from the rain. My fingers moved on their own, steady, deliberate, guided not by logic, but by instinct. Red wire, too obvious. It would be the decoy. Black, steady current feed. Cut it too soon, you trip the fail-safe. Cut it too late, and you're just another story on the evening news. I took one long breath, remembering the note on that napkin. Fake a heart attack. Get off this plane. This time I wasn't faking, but I was listening. Come on, you bastard, I whispered, my voice shaking. Show me which one you are. Then, with the kind of calm that only comes when you've already accepted the outcome, I cut the wire. The light blinked once, twice, then stopped. Silence. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then I did too. Elena's scream pierced the air. Disarm confirmed. Get him out of there. Hands pulled me from under the SUV. The cold air hit my face like forgiveness. I saw Michael pushing through the crowd, soaked to the bone, his eyes wild. He dropped to his knees beside me, gripping my hand. Dad, are you? I couldn't answer. My chest felt like a thunderstorm. My heart stuttered, then steadied, then stuttered again. Elena was shouting for the medic, her voice breaking. Stay with me, Ben. Stay with me. I smiled weakly, my breath shallow, but still there. Guess I finally listened to the warning this time. Elena let out a choked laugh that turned into a sob. You stupid, stubborn man. Michael squeezed my hand tighter, tears mixing with the rain. You saved me, Dad. Again I looked at him, really looked. His face blurred and cleared in the flashing lights, a man and a boy at once. And for the first time since Helen died, I didn't feel the weight of everything I'd lost. I felt the quiet grace of what I still had. They loaded me into the ambulance, sirens wailing into the wet night. I turned my head toward the window as the vehicle started to move. Out across the tarmac, the storm was breaking. The sky glowed faintly pink, the first light of dawn stretching its fingers across the clouds. A plane ascended in the distance, rising smooth and steady, cutting through what was left of the darkness. My reflection in the glass looked older, yes, but alive. And as the city slowly brightened outside, I heard my own voice in the back of my mind, steady, warm, full of something I hadn't felt in years. Life always finds a way to remind you, I whispered to no one in particular. You're never too old to start over. The sirens faded into the hum of morning traffic. Somewhere, the rain stopped. And for the first time in a long, long while, I let myself believe I'd earned another sunrise.